Welcome to the second episode of Playtime Online. This is the Institute of Play's brand new webinar series that connects you to all that's happening here and all of the interesting things the Institute's doing right now with design, play, and learning. I'm Amna Siddiqui, the producer and moderator of the program. And today we're recounting our experiences from the MobileQuest summer camp we ran in Chicago this past summer. We'll be discussing the open source platform Eris and touching on a few lessons learned when teaching 70 middle school students how to make their own iPhone games. I encourage everyone to please ask our panelists questions during the discussion. You can submit your questions by clicking on the blue participate text under the video on the right-hand side. We'll spend the last 15 minutes of this webinar answering your questions during our Q&A portion, so please stick around for that. And I can assure you that today's panel is pretty excited to answer your questions. So without further delay, let's meet our speakers. Today we have 5 amazing artists, designers, and educators who will be discussing mobile location-based gameplay. And we'll be also talking about how to best approach designing experiences for supporting children's learning. So without further ado, Nancy, do you want to start off the introduction?
Sure. Hi, I'm Nancy Novacek. I am a strategist in informal learning and social engagement here at the Institute, and I kind of helped put MobileQuest into action this summer. I was working with Amna to plan and produce and oversee the camps.
Lindsay?
Yes, my name is Lindsay Bates. I was one of the instructors with the MobileQuest, assisting the kids with learning the Eris program, developing it, and then putting it into action.
And John? John, I think you're muted.
So my name is John Martin. I'm with the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I'm on the Eris development team. And I've just been having fun watching you guys from a distance.
Awesome. Don?
Yeah, my name is Don Miller. I work at the Institute of Play, and this summer I assisted Nancy and Amna and Lindsay with running MobileQuest both in New York City and in Chicago.
Great. And Chris?
Hi, I'm Chris Holden. I'm at the University of New Mexico. I'm also on the Eris team. I've been making mobile games since 2006 and helping other people make them since, I don't know, about 2009.
Awesome. All right, thanks everyone. So let's get this conversation started. And I guess I'll start with you, Don. Could you tell us a little more about what MobileQuest is?
Okay, so MobileQuest is a week-long camp that this summer we ran in Chicago and New York City. And it serves as an induction experience for 6th graders that are coming in to either Chicago Quest or Quest to Learn here in New York City. And over the course of the week, the students create a location-based mobile game, so using the Eris platform. But before that happens, they learn the basics of game design through looking at games, modding games, then creating paper prototypes, and then physical games, and then finally moving on to the Eris platform a few days in. So by the time they end up using Eris, they kind of understand the type of games that they understand the type of games they can make, they understand rules and mechanics, and the play space, and they use Eris, they go outside, and they iterate by making games first in the classroom, on the computers, and then taking their mobile devices outside and testing their games. And everything culminates at the end of the week in an exhibition where parents and friends, family are invited in to see the students' work that they've created throughout the week.
Awesome. And how many years has it been going on?
This is, I believe, the second time that's been run in Chicago, and it's been going on for 3 or 4 years at least here in New York City.
Awesome. And John and Chris, I'd love to have you guys explain a little bit more about what Eris is.
Chris, you want to start?
Okay, so Eris is it's an augmented reality mobile gaming platform. which means that it's a piece of software that runs on iOS devices that people can use to play games, usually ones that take place outside and are map-based. And then it's also an easy-to-use drag-and-drop authoring tool that you use through right now a Flash-enabled browser. So most computers, but specifically not iOS devices, can be used to make Eris content. People use it for a variety of things. A lot of it is sort of outdoor place-based storytelling. Other things are data collection type activities, or games that are based around collecting things out in the world. There's also a lot of people that use it to make games that are, say, museum-based, that take place indoors instead of outdoors on a map, and they usually use QR codes instead of the GPS functionality of these devices to access content in the Eris game. I don't know, what else, John? That's sort of my basic.
One of the things that I really like about it is that it is a great prototyping tool in that people who start playing with it, they can very quickly take an idea, drag and drop onto the map, and almost immediately they can start testing it out. We have a quick travel tool so that they don't even have to actually go out to the locations that they dragged it to. They can just try it on their device immediately. And the feedback loop for success for that, because of that, is really short, and people can start very quickly saying, oh, I get how this works. And they start building off of that success over and over again.
I should also mention that it's free and open source.
Yes, that's an important fact. Great, and I think what John was talking about, that's kind of how MobileQuest used Eris. And I guess Lindsay, I would like to know, since you were a teacher there, how was it watching your students learn Eris?
It was very fascinating and hilarious watching them use Eris, in that when we took them first, the analog steps in creating the map and understanding the map layout, they seemed very but when it got right into the phones of the Eris, being that their children already indoctrinated into the technological age, they just grasped onto it right away and just ran with it. It was really fun to watch.
That's great. And Don, you were also a teacher, not at Chicago, but in New York. What was your experience with watching the kids learn and use Eris like?
Well, I think the great thing about Eris is that after a few days of talking about games, talking about rules, when we went into Eris, there's very simple building blocks of logic that exist in order to have an item show up or get an item after you visit a location, and the students really resonate with that quickly, and it allows them to make rather complex games from very simple components. And I think John was saying, they can test right there, which is really great to see if the functionality is working. And then when they go outside, it's great because it's one thing to test something in there, the logic's working, but when you get outside, it's really exciting to see the students say, oh wow, I need to make that a lot closer because I don't want to walk all that distance to get to this location. So it's really interesting because on the tech side, the kids get it right away, and then when they go outside, they really get to see how different it is when you're in that physical game space, and that's what's really exciting.
And
right,
if I can, that's a really interesting. The point of that is great because you can playtest in front of the computer, and it's great playtesting in front of the computer. But the real aha moment takes place when you're outside and you're like, oh wow, that this game is way too big, or it's going to be way too big based on what I just thought looked very short distances on the map. It actually turns out that it's too far to walk, or I forgot that we had to cross this really busy street, or something like that comes on, and now all of a sudden it becomes real.
Totally, exactly.
Yeah, Nancy, did you see anything like that when you were out there?
What did I see? I saw yeah I saw a lot of chaos. I saw a lot of kids. Yeah, they were like it does create this really interesting gap between kind of fantasy and reality, between like what the kids kind of imagine their game world to be, and then what actually happens when it hits the physical ground of public space. There are all those things that were just talked about. Like kids didn't realize that like, oh, they're actually like they placed two important pieces on either side of a really steep hill with a statue on top. And they realized that they kind of had to go and understand the framework of the public space as much as they were understanding the framework of their game space.
Great, awesome. So I guess now we have a pretty okay understanding of what MobileQuest is, what Eris is, and how these two work together and how the kids play it. So I kind of want to get into process quickly. Before the kids are actually starting to play their Eris games, they're creating prototypes using paper and pencil. So instead of handing them a phone immediately, they have to do like the basic design planning and that kind of process. I'm wondering if Don or Lindsay, you could talk about that, being in the classroom before the kids get outside and teaching them about the design process.
Do you want to go first, Don?
Hey, go ahead, please.
Okay. Well, within the process, we did an introduction of the basis of errors. Then from there, as I stated earlier, we went over an analog step just to show them how the map sequence would look, the individual attributes that we would add onto it, then give them the step-by-step procedure of how we're going to implement that onto the phone devices. Then from implemented onto the phone devices, also making them aware of any glitches that may arise and then how they can overcome those obstacles. Then with all that knowledge, they were able to create the game desired in the map sequence that we were given, and then took them into that location and then had them play the game in the location.
Don?
Okay. Yeah, sure. I can pick up here. So the basic question, if I could reiterate, was to just say the difference between the paper prototyping and then when they got Eris and having the paper first, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So yeah, one thing I noticed that's really great is that when you have a paper prototype and the students are introduced, well, we introduced them first to the type of things you can do in Eris. There's still like a lot more freedom on paper because the students are like, okay, I want to have this item here, I want to have this item here, and I want to, have a dragon here, and you need to get a sword before you get to the dragon. So you get these elaborate kind of narratives, and then like I came back to earlier, it's really interesting once they're faced with Eris because then they have to kind of fit these narratives into the mechanics that they have available electronically, with Eris, and that's where I think the real challenge is. And I really like that because, they have these narratives, but then using the tools available, they kind of have to shape it into a game. But I think it's super powerful because you get a lot more creativity on the forefront that way, and then you have the students kind of pushing the Eris platform to the max rather than just saying, oh, I see what we have to work with here. I'm going to use an item. I'm going to use a character. So it's interesting to have all that creativity kind of front-loaded and then pushing the platform harder.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So what kinds of things are the kids actually learning when they're outdoors? I'm curious to hear from the Eris guys, as well as Lindsay, Don, and Nancy, just kind of everybody's perspective.
Well, all right, I'll start a little bit. And so I don't know about these kids. I've only heard what the people here have said about what they've been learning, but it sounds like they're learning how to make games and how to take an idea that's in their head or on a piece of paper and fit it into an existing system. And then use what they know about that system to try and make the system do things that it wasn't designed to do. And that definitely matches on with my own design experience using tools like this, and then those I've seen in the people I work with. One of the sort of hard skills that you don't necessarily think about until you watch people go out and try and play one of these games is sort of reading and following a map. Being able to know which direction north is and how to go towards something that's on that map. It's not something we usually think about, but it's definitely there. Anyone else have some things they want to add in?
Well, I'll just let me again build off of what's already been said in some ways. This idea of the constraints of the game and the constraints of the physical place when they interact with each other, and the designers, whatever age they are, have to say, well, wait, I want to do this in the world, but Eris doesn't let me do this. Wait, unless maybe I can go about and do it this other way. And then you start figuring out sort of workarounds. And figuring out workarounds is the basis of improvisation. It's the basis of what we do in life. If this road is blocked, we have to go find another way to get to our location.
Right. To piggyback off of that, the first location that we went to when we were in Millennium Park, for those of you who may have never been in Chicago, there's a big metallic beam that's in the middle of the park. That beam created such an issue for the kids in the connectivity on the signal and the locations where they needed to pick up their information notes. And just as you stated, John, this is how they're able to improv and say, well, can we go to a part of the park where there's not a lot of metal here? And we did just that, and that's how we got around it.
Yeah, I actually think that's a perfect segue into our next section. Let's talk about what happened at Chicago. At Chicago, at Grant Park, at Cloud Gate, at the J. Pritzker Center. Let's talk about all of it. Nancy, you look like you're ready.
I'm ready to go. Because in the planning of these camps, we'd used Eris in the past, and I guess the past 2 summers the kids had worked on the High Line, which is a long skinny space on some raised train tracks in New York City. And the feedback from the game designers and the previous teachers was that that space is really, really too linear and didn't allow for a lot of kind of interesting interactions that the kids were looking for. So we moved it to a big field on the West Side Highway. And when we were looking for sites in Chicago, the camp was at DePaul University, which is a great location, right in downtown, and is really, really close to Millennium Park. And being a big fan of Millennium Park, I thought it'd be great to put the camp's game and situate the Eris games there. So there's a Millennium Park, as it turns out, is a couple of different parks rolled into one. There's the part that has Cloud Gate and the other large art installations, and then it's next door adjacent to the Pritzker Pavilion. The Pritzker Pavilion is a big field, much like the one we used in New York, where, thank you very much, where they play concerts and have events, and it's this kind of perfect game space, we thought. What we didn't know is that this is actually a private park, and the park has been a victim of its own success, and by that I mean apparently it gets so much foot traffic that they have to close it every so often to give the grass a break. But nowhere in any of our research had any of these conditions suggested themselves. So Don and Amna and I and the team of game designers at the Institute of Play, Claudio and Shula, had all worked together to kind of cite the main points of the kind of the outdoor components of Eris in this pavilion. And we got there and we were totally shut down. To the tune of I was running through the park to try to find the officials, to find who was in charge, to see if we could circumvent that situation, and I was met with 3 no's in a row. So then we quickly tried to just move the game over to the public part of Millennium Park, right around the Bean. I think Lindsay started to talk a little bit about that. It was a kind of incredible moment where we were on our phones to Shula and Claudio, who were back in New York, who were dragging all of the game components and resituating them around the Bean, and then we got everything around the Bean and nothing worked again because there was a big metal object in the middle. And so I think at that point, Don and Amna, you guys went on walkabout to try to find yet another location, correct? Which is about, I don't know, about a quarter mile away down in Grant Park.
Yeah,
and I think that was Lindsay, you and your teaching partner originally told us about this space, right?
Correct.
Yeah, you saved it. We needed somebody from Chicago to be like, look, this is where there's not tourists and a bunch of other things going on where we could go.
Yep.
Little did we know it was located right next to where Lollapalooza was going to be happening in a couple days. So on our last day when we had the exhibition, we also had bands playing right next door. But at least it still was the most ideal. It was a place where a concert was happening next to it.
We made it work.
Totally.
So what's the lesson in this? What kinds of things should we be anticipating when looking for a game space?
Right. So, oddly enough, I think my learning from this is that like these, like the kind of almost kind of like kind of large sidebar spaces in public spaces that aren't already like highly specified, seem to be better locations for these kinds of creative endeavors. Both our game designers and our teachers here in New York, and I think the kids and the teachers in Chicago, like, it seemed less intuitive to just pick a big wide open space than a place with, like, I think, you know, some kind of landmarks and things happening. But in both cases, this kind of more generic, large, freer space turned out to be a better kind of space of possibility for kids' games. I don't know if anyone else has anything to add to that, but that was a pretty big piece of learning. And also that we really needed to do a lot more research about the nature of different kinds of public spaces and what they require and actually who controls them.
Yeah.
So to me, this is really interesting because from the very first time we were, you know, making outdoor games, we found time and time again that the specifics of the place, even if we don't plan for them or you know, sort of want them to, they bleed through, and we end up finding out about the place where we're doing this activity, and you know, sort of what goes on there, whether it's running into people, running into problems. The specifics of that place end up mattering over and over and over again, and we find out more about the places that we're trying to work in. So sometimes it gets in our way in terms of not being able to play the games where you want. Other times you meet interesting people and find out things that you wouldn't have known before. But I think it's always an interesting thing, having sort of your plans come up against reality in that particular way. Let's see. Another example is, well, every time I would design games with Jim Matthews, who's another person on the ARIS team who couldn't actually be here today, he would always find some neighborhood resident wherever we were playing a game. Find someone to go and talk to, and then find out about the history of that place. It was amazing how he could just find people. And so it's something that, you know, when I'm taking students around for the Spanish game in the neighborhood here, I'm trying to find people to talk to. Sometimes I'll find people that only speak Spanish, and then I go and grab the students and bring them over and have them help translate to meet these people. Other times, I don't know, maybe we'll get yelled at. A good example of a game that we were making and place sort of bled through and we weren't expecting it was one of the games we made earlier was called Hip Hop Tycoon, and Ben Devane actually started that game, but I took it over at some point. And the idea was that you could play it in any school's backyard. Instead of being tied to a specific park at a specific lake, the way all our other games were, the idea was it was supposed to be playable anywhere. And so we chose a middle school that was next to a strip mall. So, you know, pretty generic, and had kids play it there. But in the papers, right around the time we were playing the game, we found out there was a big brouhaha about what stores were planned to be in that strip mall. So this game is all about starting your own hip-hop store, and the controversy in that particular strip mall was Best Buy wanted to open up there. And this was a neighborhood north of Milwaukee, and the people in that neighborhood had some weird feeling that if there was a Best Buy open up there, it would bring the wrong people into that neighborhood to buy music. I don't really understand it, but it was apparently a big deal, and sort of organized around the exact issue that the game was about, even though we totally didn't expect it.
And I can chime in on this as well. With Sick South Shore Beach that we looked at, and actually a couple of the other environmental games that we created, just the kids, or the students, the players walking around and getting goose poop on their shoe is an interaction with place that really drives in the, it's sort of a light bulb. It's like, oh, maybe all of this goose poop washing off into the watershed has some effect on this. And sure enough, it does. So people the designers will start to, whether they're us or the students, designers, once they get out in the field, they start incorporating new things into the field, into the game itself, based on that experience. Another really quick example was, for my dissertation, I had my campers run through a 4-day trip through the woods using this sort of augmented reality platform. And at one point, they went off the main trail, and all of a sudden, they started to realize trees are much closer together, one said, than I thought that they were. Well, of course they are, because whenever they walk in the woods, they were always on the trail, which is this huge, wide path that's beautifully kept for you. But once you go off trail, the trees are closer together than you would think that they are. So learning about the affordances of the place really enrich what is learned. And it causes people to see the places that they are experiencing through a different lens because of it, I think.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely. I guess I'm trying to. How many days were the kids playing in that area? Was it just for one day, or was it over a couple of days?
It was over a couple.
I'm sorry, which one?
Oh, yours, John.
The dissertation one?
Yeah.
All right. So it was a 4-day trip. So
okay.
3 nights and 4 days, which created all kinds of problems as far as device batteries and things like that. But yeah. It was a long-term trip.
Yeah, actually, well, I mean, I think that something that maybe Nancy or Lindsay or Don can talk about is, I think we lost that affordance, like some of those affordances, when we kept having to change the location. We were at the Bean one day, we were at the Pavilion the next day, and then we were at Grant Park, and I feel like the kids didn't really get to explore like the same space and figure out different kinds of I guess they didn't figure out how to improve the way they could use that space and learn from it. Nancy, do you have anything?
Yeah, I can talk about that. That's absolutely what happened. I mean, there was kind of there were kind of like a bunch of layered factors that I think, in hindsight, really detracted from the kids' abilities to be the best designers they could be. The first was this like kind of overarching issue of place, and it's simply because we're New Yorkers trying to cite an experience in a place that we know a little bit about, but don't know enough about. So that one thing is that we need to MobileQuest is really an experience that's kind of hyper local in a way, and that making mobile location-based games, at least with kids in such a short amount of time, like really has to be produced fully to its fullest extent by a local contingency. So that the kind of place was definitely one factor, and then the kind of the event space of summer was another factor, right? Don mentioned that Lollapalooza was happening, which was was a huge distraction. I mean, we were trying to make sure that we were keeping track of the kids. There were kind of huge crowds everywhere. There was thumping bass. There were various closures around Grant Park that were kind of causing like more havoc. And then the third component was the technology that the kids were kind of struggling with. So we were using iPhone 3s, right? Correct?
Yeah.
and there was just like a real kind of, there were like a lot of obstacles to hurdle, given the nature of these phones in interfacing with Eris in public space. So a long way to say, like, there was like, I think a lot of hurdles to kind of really getting to that amazing place-based learning that MobileQuest, when using Eris, I think can really get to.
Mm-hmm. And I guess I also want to, just quickly touch on the technology that was used, because I think that was also a part of one of our hiccups. Don, could you talk about the technology?
Yeah, I think technology is going to be a hiccup just about everywhere you do anything. It's the thing that you can never anticipate. From what computers the students are going to be using every day in a shared lab space. They don't have the same computers every day. To some phones have better battery life than others. Slightly different connectivity to data networks that allow for connection to the Eris server, or GPS, which we realized is two separate things to figure out where you're located in a space. So I guess the only thing you could say is have the best computers available and have the best devices available. But even then, there's a lot of things that can go wrong, and you're gonna. The best thing you can do to prepare for that is to go to the location, I think, ahead of time with the devices that you are going to be using, have the computers, and just do a test. And so whether it is out in a camping trip or just in a park, do as much testing as possible ahead of time to eliminate any variables, because there's always going to be things that you don't anticipate. And I guess the other thing I should mention about that is that at the end of the day, the people that are most worried about the technology hiccups and things not working are us, and the students really learned a lot. So I think in the moment we were freaking out over a few things in Chicago, more even than New York City, with some of the technical problems we had. But the students are still learning how to create games. They're still play testing, and they're also learning from some of the technology problems that we have as well that teach them, because when you have these problems that arise, the students need to learn a little bit about what's actually going on behind the scenes. So like I said, at the end of the day, the students are still learning, and the technology hiccups are going to be dealt with, and it's probably the teachers and the organizers that suffer the most from it. They're probably the only ones that suffer. So that's all. I don't know if anyone agrees with that.
No, well, I have a, sorry, Lindsay, so this points to the question. I want to know from the Eris guys what MobileQuest was like for them, because we were on the phone and we were texting you guys and we were emailing you guys madly, especially during Chicago, trying to find Barack Obama.
I remember that.
What is this?
There was a bug in one of the students' games. I know we were trying to talk to you guys and to David. Hey Don, can you mute yourself? We were trying to get in touch with you guys because we were having some response time and some response problems and and then we were just having some bugs in some of the students' games. And Don, I remember, was on the phone going, "I can't find Barack Obama. I can't find Barack Obama," who was like one of the assets in one of the students' games. And so one of the things I'm most interested in is, what Chicago MobileQuest was like for you guys, and if you guys were receiving any of our communications, or if that was other folks on your team.
John, were you there at all? I definitely wasn't around for this.
I think I was
talking to people in
out of my camp during this time, so it was probably Dave and Phil.
Okay, it was probably Dave and Phil. And do you guys know anything about? I think we might have crashed your server, or you had reached the number of users, or I think we did something. And there was a big problem where at some point, and I was just really interested in finding out what was happening from your end.
I don't remember hearing about that.
Okay.
When was MobileQuest?
I think it was the first week of August.
First week of August.
Yeah.
Okay. So one thing that I do remember that was going on with Eris at that time, that was just one of these weird little technical glitches. So it wasn't the number of users, I don't think. One of the problems was there was the number of numbers that Eris was allowed to allot itself to items, to media things that you upload to Eris. And it was only allotted a certain number for that variable to go up to. And it had been hit. And I was making a game at that time too, and was just banging my head against a wall because stuff that I knew how to do for years wasn't working, and I couldn't figure out why or what was happening. So I do remember that. In terms of the stability of the server, that's one of the things that has been sort of interesting in terms of Eris being like kind of an indie project, and yet wanting to make a server that is reliable when there's hundreds of people on it, to be able to pay for that. And the way it works right now is that the Minnesota Historical Society, through the project that they're working on, needs that robustness and stability for the server, and is essentially paying the way for everyone else. So they're paying for that hosting to work.
Interesting.
So wait, what do you mean by that? That they're paving the way?
They're paying for it. So we have, I don't know if it's an Amazon EC2 account or what, but some hosting account somewhere. And the way that the bills for that work is the more you use, the more machines they essentially turn on. So that if a lot of people are using Eris, the machines can scale to make that use available, so that there's not a bottleneck when a lot of people are using it. And then when they turn more machines on, they charge us more money. But the Minnesota Historical Society is footing that bill for all the Eris users right now.
What do you see as the future of Eris? Do you, given this incredible popularity of the platform, I mean, is there potential for other organizations to kind of put Eris on their own servers and serve it? Like, what have you guys talked about this?
Well, the way that we don't really know, because we're just sort of moving from moment to moment. I think the way that it's worked out for a large project to be able to fund the resource for everyone has been pretty easy to do. It's not an expensive bill, but it's not something that I could pay from my institution right now. And so I think seeking out partners to make those contributions to make Eris better for everyone is a model that we're interested in going forward, and seems to have worked pretty well over the last couple of years. So other partners that have given us little bits, often money just to hire a programmer, have been the Pearson Foundation, the New Learning Institute, certainly Engage at UW-Madison. John, who are some of the other people that have sort of made things happen monetarily?
Well, so Pearson, of course, and the Library of Congress is starting to. There are a number of smaller pots of money, I guess, that we're able to draw from as well. But one of the points that I'd like to make is that Eris can be run on any server. It's all open source, it's all free, and so anybody can set up their own, shingle and become an Eris server. So far that hasn't, and I think that we expected that to happen a lot more. I don't know if it is actually happening at all, but it seems like so far everybody's playing on the same server, and to scale up accordingly, as Chris mentioned, we have rack space now, which we'll just turn on another machine and give us a little bit more space and be able to handle a lot more users as needed, and then throttle back down when fewer are playing.
Great. Okay, well, we have to start the Q&A session in a couple of minutes, but I'd like to wrap up, and I'm just wondering the future goals of MobileQuest. Where do we go from here? Where do we go from here, taking just all that we've learned this past summer, and even I think this conversation with John and Chris has been really, and Lindsay, it's been very enlightening. So what are we doing next summer? How's that going to go down, Don and Nancy?
Well, I'm glad you asked. So one of the biggest things that we've learned from MobileQuest is that, especially last summer, running it for the first time in Chicago, was that actually the key to MobileQuest are its teachers. And Lindsay was a kind of a great example of what a great MobileQuest teacher looks like. But we really learned that the key to kind of helping this experience happen in lots of other places outside of New York City is really to help train teachers and informal educators who are part of institutions who want to run MobileQuest. So we are in the midst of thinking about all of the things that we'd need to put into place to kind of run basically a MobileQuest Institute, where we can train some teachers to take that experience back to their home context to run their own kind of robust versions of MobileQuest.
Great. Anything from you, Don, since I know you guys are working on this together closely?
No, I think it about sums it up.
Okay, great. And then I think we touched on, your future goals, Chris and John, but is there anything that, any future goals that you'd like to think about or talk about that that relate to MobileQuest, kind of the future of MobileQuest and helping that camp, helping that camp's experience?
So one of the things that we just started to work on this year, and we're slowly expanding it, is the idea of more interactions in the field, more interactions by the players. We've recently unveiled a notebook feature so that people can actually go out and do inquiry. They can do field research out wherever. So making a game doesn't have to be the creation of a narrative. It's not really even a game necessarily. But you can field a couple of quests or a couple of questions, say, in a park. Go find 5 trees of X variety. And then the students can go out and they can take pictures of those trees, and they can tag those trees accordingly. And then other students can comment on those trees and say, oh, no, that was an oak. You were supposed to be looking for the pine. Not that those two are really easy to confuse, but and they can vote up and vote down on them. And so these player-to-player interactions are becoming increasingly, or can be increasingly more important. But the actual creation of the game then is just a simple matter of asking a couple of good questions that will sort of facilitate these player-to-player interactions in the field.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And then I just want to also ask Lindsay, would you teach this again? And what kinds of things would you recommend moving forward? Let's say if we did the MobileQuest Chicago camp next year.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, I definitely would teach it again. One of the things that I would recommend is having the teachers do their own recon of the areas as well as the developers to work more hand in hand, so that way when it comes to the troubleshooting, the teachers can be that first line of making sure that the devices work properly, instead of having to take the issue to the developers and then wait for that reply back.
Great. And any last comments? I think we should move on to the question and answer portion. Okay, so let's see here. The first question is from Miranda, and she asks, how do you take students to the next level of design? I'm working with interns who have input game aspects, but are tripping up on the requirements and setting up the quest. Do you have suggestions for training or settling that up for students?
I think one thing to do, and this is something that we saw in MobileQuest this summer, is that kids kind of understood the basic, like, that games have mechanics and they have components, and they take place in a space. But they seemed to get to a point where they were really excited just to have created something, and to get them to the point of assessing, of actually evaluating that something and whether or not it was a really kind of exciting game to play for others, was something that we saw happening in MobileQuest. And so I would suggest co-creating a set of criteria of what makes a good game with your interns or whoever you're working with as designers. So a really important part to the design process is not only understanding the constraints under which you're designing and the goal of the thing that you're designing, but then the criteria by which you'll judge your ideas. And so I think really strong criteria about what makes a good game are really as important a starting place as the idea itself.
Does anybody want to add to that?
Just really briefly, one of the things that we talked about earlier was sort of being able to try out your game as soon as you've made it. And so in terms of getting requirements to work, actually being able to try it out and see if the game behaves the way you want it to, and then going back in when it doesn't and changing something, using that feedback loop to learn how to do requirements has been a real aid to the people that I've been trying to get up to speed on Eris. But it is a legitimately difficult part of making games.
So I would add that making games in a group, even if it's in like the same room and you're working on your own game, really helps, because when you get caught up on certain things, you can just ask the person next to you, and there's a good chance that they will have already run into that problem as well. But if they haven't, they're going to. And so it's nice to have sort of that groupthink going on. If you can't do it with a bunch of other people in the same room, or if everybody in the room is stumped, hop on the Eris Games Google group and ask the community, because we have, almost 5,000 designers now, so there's a very good chance that somebody else has run into that problem. And if nobody has, then the developers want to know about it. It's going to be a big one.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to ask the next question. This is from Edge, and they ask, how does working with Eris change in regards to the change in maps in iOS 6?
Easy answer there. It doesn't change anything. It works so perfectly, fluidly, as if nothing ever happened, with the exception of the underlying maps look different. So if Apple forgot to leave your town on the map, then that's something you're stuck with, I guess. But yeah, Eris doesn't notice the difference at all. It's really nice.
Hello? Everybody? Oh, okay. I think we had a technical issue.
Yeah.
It says that we're still on air, so I think we should still talk. Okay, so did we answer that question? I think everybody's muted. So
I think we answered the question. There's not a big difference in Eris with the Apple, the Google map, other than the map application is a little bit different. And so as Chris was saying, if Apple's map is screwed up a little bit, then what you see is going to be screwed up a little bit.
And my personal experience has actually been the opposite. The maps load much quicker. You don't need as good of an internet connection to get a map to show up on your screen. One feature that's out there for Eris is the ability to add custom maps that's new. I haven't even gotten to use it myself yet, but the idea is you could put an image, and instead of seeing Apple or Google's version of what the Earth looks like, you could see mountains and dragons and things.
You do your own treasure maps.
that's awesome.
But again, I haven't played with that either. So.
All right, so I'm going to ask another question. This one is from Juan. He asks, one of the things that I notice with Eris is that it can be very text-driven to convey the story in the game. Have the tools introduced lately, like notebooks, etc., made that more interactive? How are they used in programs in Chicago and New York? And he wanted to also mention that he loves Eris.
Did any of you in MobileQuest find that ways to have students tell stories visually or orally, or sort of not so much with text?
Lindsay, Don, or Nancy, do you guys have?
I'd say a lot of the students did end up using text, at least for kind of the introduction was pretty text heavy. Many of the students use visual assets, but yeah, I mean, I think, and none of them really used. Yeah, I mean, most of them were just kind of text driven early on, and since we only had a couple days to develop it, they were rather simple, kind of. From there on out, where they would get an item, it would be very clear what you have to do with it next. But we didn't get as deep with the dialogue, so I don't know what I'm saying here. But basically, they used text, but I wouldn't say it was too heavy.
Correct.
Yeah. 3 day. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Lindsay. Sorry.
Oh no, I was just saying I agree with Don.
Yeah, I mean, so the kids in effect are basically, they work with Eris for 2.5 days. Over the course of this camp, and that nets out to be probably a total of 12 hours. So like kind of like elaborate uses of dialogue or narrative, I think get pushed to the back. So in the kind of the struggle to finish what, like Don said, what started as like really elaborate game structures, to try to kind of take their game ideas, learn the platform, and get them into the platform, and then deal with the constraints of the public space. Like that's a lot, and the fact that they do it is amazing. So I would hope that these like robust narrative tools could come into play over kind of a longer form engagement with the design process in Eris.
So I can talk a little bit about this. One of the big goals for Eris is to have that, what was that, sort of a 0 smile and 3 clicks. That idea of like a very short turnaround to be able to reassure your confidence in creating a game. So a lot of what we've been doing is trying to keep it as simple as possible while allowing for longer term development by the professionals who have more tolerance for ambiguity or who want to dig a little bit deeper into it. That said, the notebook tool that we're working on right now, we can do a lot with it, but it's not as simple as we'd like it to be. We can do spawning, which is a new interaction. It's still not as simple as we'd like it to be. We can do trading now, the new map overlay that Chris talked about, but we haven't figured out how to make those as easily accessible as text. Text is great for prototyping because you can just type in a short description and go. And for a 12-hour game, to design a game, that's what you want. You can't jump into something too difficult, or at least we haven't figured out how to do that yet.
All right. Okay, so the next question is from Jennifer from Minnesota, and she asks, we are curious about how you guided the students on content. Was it completely open for them? Was it based on the physical space? Did you ask a guiding question or provide topics? I think Lindsay and Don, this question's for you guys.
Let me see. Well, one of the ways that we guided the students through the content was within the parameters that Eris set up. So when there was a problem that arose, just as how Don was speaking, is the way that we reacted to the issue. If we acted overly frustrated, like we didn't know what was going on, that would have turned the kids off, and it would have made them that much more frustrating. So one of the ways that we guided them through the content was just that staying calm, letting them know it's technology, it happens. So with some of the options that are available to us, these are how we're going to get through the issue. And it seemed to work with quite a few of the kids.
And to follow up there, just based on the content, yeah, it was completely open to them, but it was based on physical space to address both parts of that question. So we did have maps that we printed out, both in Chicago and in New York, of the space that we were going to use. And when the students were paper prototyping, they got a copy of the map. And then they had little cutout pieces of paper that represented different items that were available in Eris, and they literally pasted it up on the map. And that way they could actually kind of visualize the space before they were there. So I think that was a really good technique, because then when they went to the computer, it was they already had the paper prototype that was more fleshed out with all the different rules, the narrative. We actually made them pre-write the text for any of the item boxes. So when they got to the computer, they had their paper prototype. It was based in the same physical space that they were looking at, and we're like, okay, well, here, type in this address. Now zoom in until you see roughly the map that you saw in your paper prototype. Now start taking that stuff and inputting it into Eris. So that was the first step. There was like a one-to-one correlation between physical space on their paper prototype and in the game. But like John and Chris were saying earlier, of course, all that changes, because once they're inputting things like, okay, well, what do you want the distance of this to be? Oh, make it 20 feet. Or said some students like, well, how big is 20 feet? And they actually don't really know until they get outside. So hope that answers there.
Yeah, I just wanted to say one last thing about that. While we didn't guide the students' content, I was just recalling the names of some of the games. World War III, Vegetable Wars, and there was something about a bacon game somewhere in there. Because this experience is really just like an incredible kind of catalyst experience into game design and mobile platforms. But you, as the Eris guys are pointing out, that Eris can actually be wonderfully content specific. One could imagine an infinite world of games from even a simple prompt around a simple topic, or a simple location, or a simple date.
Awesome. Okay, so I think we have only a time for a couple of questions. So this one comes from Jolise from Global Kids, New York City. She asks, what are some tips, tricks, or suggestions to allow for more randomness and decision-making within games as opposed to a more linear narrative?
Yeah, I guess maybe some of the Eris guys could talk about this, if it sounds like it's a relatively technical question.
Right.
Yeah, so there's a couple different ways to go about it. The hard one, the one that takes a lot of time, is to write a branching narrative inside Eris. So if you know how to write a linear narrative in Eris, all you have to do is make these branching points and then repeat your work a bunch of times over and make sure all the interconnections make sense. So that's a lot of work as a designer. But you can do it. Something that is a little bit different would be to use the spawning features in Eris, which is specifically, instead of placing your game objects on the map one by one, you can create rules for them to generate themselves either around locations or players at certain times and under certain circumstances. So a really simple game to play is Rupee Collector that uses spawning. And that way the play of the game is generated by sort of what players do under these random circumstances, and it's not linear. Another one is to use the notebook features to sort of think in terms of data collection activities, maybe more than a game that is authored, because those sort of take a life of their own as people try to accomplish them out in the world anyway. Some other earlier ones or ideas are where you can create scarcity of items among players and in the world. And then the interactions of the players based around that scarcity can generate things that are, sort of generate their own meaning and feel nonlinear in that sense.
This idea of scarcity is a fantastic one. It's really because all of a sudden, if it's no longer a game between you and the computer, or a game the designer has figured out the branching narrative and gone through this whole simulation thing, now all of a sudden it's a player pitted against player. And those player-to-player interactions can be fantastic. Whether it's through the notebook, where you have to collect things and then have other people like them, and requirements, you can set requirements that the quest is done if 5 people like the thing that you've done. So you can create these player-to-player interactions, or the scarcity where you have to like decide, do I want to go for the blue rupee or for the red rupee? Which one will be the longest? I don't know. And will the other team get there sooner than I will?
Awesome. All right. Well, we're out of time, so I'm going to stop it. There were still a couple of questions left, but for those whose questions weren't answered, please check back in a couple of days. The panelists here, I'm going to send them your questions, and they'll answer it, and we're going to post them on this page. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us, Nancy, Don, Lindsay, Chris, John. It was terrific having all of you guys here today. For our viewers, if you'd like to continue the discussion, we'll be opening the comment section right after this broadcast. Please tune in to the next episode of Playtime. It airs Wednesday, December 12th, and our design team is going to be talking about taking classroom learning to the next level, and they'll be workshopping a brand new product called Playforce. And please don't forget to sign up for our mailing list to hear the latest things about the Institute of Play or just about Playtime in general. All you have to do is click the Join Us at the top of this page when the webinar's over. So thank you for tuning in. If you like what you're seeing, please spread the word about Playtime Online. Have a great afternoon, everyone. See you guys.
Bye.
Bye.